Across the green face of the Etosha National Park in southwest Africa runs a scar with a purpose. It's specially cleared ground, and down the middle runs a fence. On one side of the fence lies the national park. On the other, there's farmland. Both sides look much the same, with one difference. The farmland has permanent water, even in drought conditions. The fence, hundreds of miles of it, is designed to keep the animals inside Etosha National Park. When the dry season comes, the park loses much of its attraction for game. The great salty waste at the heart of the reserve, the pan itself, is dried up and as hot as a furnace. When the rains come in December, this vast pan will flood. But now the hooves of the game kick up choking dust instead of refreshing water. Even desert antelope like the Hemsbok, the southern race of the oryx, find life difficult when water is as scarce as this. They kneel to lick the moisture out of the mud. Zebra need far more water than the Hemsbok. The herd crowds round a rocky waterhole where only a few stagnant puddles linger on between the boulders, and even these are evaporating fast. Across the trees, not far away on the farmland, there's not only the permanent water, but an oasis of greenery. Possibly the greater kudu bull can sense that the grass is greener on the farmland, but between lies the intimidating fence. Intimidating to some, maybe, but by no means all. When the elephant herds decide to follow their ancient dry season migration trails, it takes more than a fence to stop them. It's like an armored breakthrough by tanks. Not only elephants, but zebra and antelope are now free to invade the farmland. When this happens, the farmer is liable to reach for his gun. During the dry season, he has enough trouble finding grazing for his cattle without competing with herds of elephants. Etosha's head ranger, Peter Stark, knows a lot about elephants, but he also knows a lot about horses. As a first-class dressage rider, he trains his own horses and often competes on them. Hardly recognizable as the rugged head ranger, he competes in the show ring at Swakopmund. Bush hat and overalls are exchanged for the traditional top hat and black jacket of the dressage competitor. A salute to the judges, and he's ready to begin the complicated laid-down movements that require complete harmony between horse and rider. Dressage may not look very exciting to the spectators, but it's really the height of equestrian skill. Neither the rider's hands nor legs appear to move to give the horse a command, yet the horse moves smoothly from one movement to the next. The judges will be watching for evenness of pace, the suppleness with which it carries out set movements like the cross-legged gait known as half-passing. It's a nearly faultless exhibition. Peter Stark backs the horse neatly and moves forward in a collected canter to finish his show. And at the end of the event, to collect a first, a large silver cup. Next day, the head ranger of Etosha National Park will be back at work in the bush again. While Stark was shoeing his horse one day, He suddenly had a thought about his elephant problem. If cowboys could round up cattle, perhaps they could also round up elephants. But first, the cowboys had to be found and trained. So did the horses. All horse training, whether it's for show jumping or herding elephants, starts with basic schooling. The horse has to learn to be sure of itself and to be obedient to the rider's wishes and commands. Everything else follows from this. As cowboys, like the one training here, Peter Stark recruited some of his bushmen. To teach his bushmen the elements of training, Peter Stark demonstrated on some of his own young dressage horses. Trotting over poles teaches a horse to lift and place its feet correctly. Small jumps, properly taken, make it bold and give it confidence. But the real hard slog of training comes in the menage, the outdoor ring. Stark rides with the upright seat of a classic dressage competitor. His hands are still, and his legs and body tell the horse all it needs to know about changes of pace and direction. All this may seem to have very little to do with driving elephants on horseback, but he knows that obedience and calmness will be vital when it comes to the real thing. When a hard training session's over, every horse enjoys a row, though the rider who has to groom it next day may not be quite so pleased about it. Training isn't all hard schooling. Horses need to stretch their legs in a flat-out gallop. At last, they're ready for the final stage of training for the special assignment Stark has in mind. The horses and riders have now to meet an elephant. A single bull has very obligingly isolated himself behind one of the drinking trenches that provide water for animals inside the park in the dry season. There's no guarantee that the elephant won't charge across the ditch, but elephants are sensible and cautious creatures, and the trench is both wide and deep. It's an ideal situation in which to give the ponies their first close look at and smell of an elephant. In the circumstances, this one's behaving very calmly. There's an opportunity for more advanced training when the elephant finds a way round the end of that ditch. Now, when the horses move in, will the elephant back down? And will the horses face the elephant? With this elephant, at least, the trick seems to work. But the lure of the water in the ditch is too strong. Peter Stark leads in his riders to show that they mean business. The elephant is not impressed. He is not impressed, but he's not exactly pleased either. His head is up and his ears erect, both signs that he'd rather drink undisturbed. It's a remarkable tribute to the schooling of the ponies that they remain so steady. The elephant continues to drink and bathe, but he's in two minds whether to charge or not. It's difficult to guess what the elephant's reactions are and why he doesn't charge. Possibly he's confused by the strange smell of the horses. It may even obscure the normally terrifying scent of man, though obviously not entirely. Now a new and more dangerous situation is developing. He's round the end of the trench again, and he means business. This time, it's a job for the master horseman himself. Like a matador facing the bull alone, Peter Stark challenges the elephant to a single-handed confrontation. The elephant is left in sole command of the ring. But the exercise has been completely successful. Stark has shown riders and horses that they can stand up to elephants. The day comes to put the theory to the test. Elephants have broken through the fence 50 miles from park headquarters. The farmer is demanding action, or else. The ponies go up into a homemade trailer which many a pampered show jumper might refuse. Elephant herding ponies can't afford to be temperamental. Stark has trained them to accept almost anything, even a rattly trailer with corrugated sides and no dividing partition. The first part of the journey is along bumpy, dusty park tracks. A camp in the bush. They're still miles from that break in the fence, but this is as far as the vehicles can take them. From now on, the scrub is too dense for anything but horses to negotiate. That's why Peter Stark thought of using horses in the first place. Land Rovers just wouldn't be able to move in the thick bush. They won't move out until next morning now. Years of stable discipline insist that saddles and tack are correctly hung up, even in the bush. It's too early yet for a campfire, but the embers have another purpose. Stark has lived all his life in the bush, so his fieldcraft is as good as that of his bushman rangers. There's a bee's nest in the tree under which they have chosen to camp. If you like wild honey, it's a chance too good to be missed. First, a little smoke from a smoldering branch. Every beekeeper knows that smoke quietens bees down. But have wild African bees heard of the science of beekeeping? And do they know the rules? There's no choice but to climb up and find out. Peter Stark soars into the bark beneath the nest. So far, the smoke seems to be working. But the real attack on the bees' hoard of honey hasn't yet begun. The hammer blows are to drive out a section of trunk cut by the saw. Now the bees are really buzzing. Stark and his bushmen have done this so often that they are almost immune to bee stings. The honey from these wild bees' nests is like nothing you'll ever buy in a jar. You may get comb, dead bees, and a bit of bark all mixed up with it, but it tastes like rich brown nectar. Regardless of stings, Stark blows one or two persistent bees from a piece of comb and then eats it like toffee. The rest of the comb goes into a bucket for his bushmen. Delicious and well worth a sting or two. It's typical of the man and the way he likes to live. Stark and the bushmen settle down to wait. Other rangers are due to rendezvous here later with their horses to take part in tomorrow's operation. He'll need as many riders as he can get. It's a dawn start. There's still a long way to ride to the gap in the fence. The ponies are tacked up in the cool dawn air. It's a wonderful time to go riding, with the bush smelling its freshest and sounding its sweetest with birdsong. But perhaps today the riders feel just a little apprehensive. No one knows how the elephants or the horses will behave. Peter Stark's six-shooter isn't for self-defense against elephants. Anyway, the bullets he stuffs into his pockets would just bounce off. The guns are simply to provide sound effects for getting the elephants on. Anyway, the bullets he stuffs into his pockets would just bounce off. The guns are simply to provide sound effects for getting the elephants on the move. The scene could be one from any TV Western, only this time the bad men are runaway elephants and the sheriff is a head ranger of a national park. In Westerns, the riders gallop everywhere, regardless of country or distances. But when you have a real job of work to do on a horse, you rest it by walking it as much as possible. The bush is so thick, it's easy to see why Land Rovers would be useless. In sight of the fence, they break into a canter. There's not much doubt where some of the elephants broke bounds. Horses need a clear passage if they're not to get caught and panic. A bushman cuts partly broken wire away. They're all through. Now, somewhere ahead in the thick bush, there's an elephant herd that will deeply resent any attempt to drive it away from the water and the green growth that surrounds it. You have to move carefully in such close cover, though the betting is that the herd will be very near to the water. Just the same, it's absolutely vital to keep a sharp lookout. An elephant can hide itself remarkably well. As Peter Stark expected, the spoor follows the old migration trail the elephants always used in the dry season, long before the fence was set up. They're very close now. Peter Stark calls his riders up into line. The elephants are by the water. A big bull is streaked with wet mud. The herd hasn't yet got their scent. They're blissfully happy. So happy it seems a crime to disturb them. But if they stay here, the farmer may eventually shoot them. He'd be well within his rights if he did so. Stark's first move is one of gentle persuasion. Perhaps just a show of force will be enough to make them surrender. A big bull on the right shows his defiance, and a feeling of uneasiness runs right through the herd. Any minute now, they may charge, and this time it's not just one elephant, and there's no deep ditch in between. Somehow the deadlock has to be broken, so Peter Stark faces the ringleader alone. One blow with that trunk could drive his head right down into his shoulders. The bull begins to show signs of weakness. If he can be broken, then the rest of the mob may turn and run. For a while longer, he stands his ground. He's got weight on his side, nearly 7 tons of it. They've cracked at last, though some stay behind to cover the herd's dignified retreat. The confrontation isn't quite over yet. Two of the biggest bulls refuse to budge until the herd is well away. Now it's a question of keeping them moving in the right direction, back to the park. Even when they're flat out, elephants always seem to move in such slow motion. When the herd decides to stand its ground in thick scrub, that's when plenty of noise and a few pistol shots are needed to get them going again. In such dense bush, the elephants may quite easily turn the tables and ambush the horsemen. So they've got to be stampeded again. It's a nasty feeling, being in thick thorn bush with an angry herd of elephants you can't even see. Part of the herd is out in the open and moving towards the fence again. But the issue is by no means decided yet. The situation becomes pretty confused. For a few moments, neither elephants nor horsemen seem to know which way they're going. The country opens out again, and now the fence is less than a mile ahead. It's a full-blooded retreat, though not without one courageous rearguard action. It would be too much to expect the elephants to hit the gap in the fence exactly where they broke through. But as long as they hit the fence, they'll make their own gap. The leaders are safely back in Etosha National Park again. The rest of the herd will follow. Peter Stark, crack dressage rider, has collected another notable equestrian award, a rosette for a successful elephant drive. Now all that remains to be done is to collect up his posse and ride back into town. But first, there's the little matter of a fence to be mended.